The village of Aquino was alive with celebration. The streets were bustling with excitement, and every corner of the village was dressed in vibrant colors. Flowers hung like gallants from the rooftops, and the scent of freshly cooked meals filled the air. It wasn't just any day, it was the day of the grand wedding between Amara, the village's most beautiful maiden, and Ku, the son of the wealthiest merchant in the region. Every villager, from the youngest child to the old elder, was in attendance in a large, beautifully adorned tent. Amara sat, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her hands were trembling slightly as they adjusted her attire and prepared her for the ceremony. Her gown, woven from the finest silk and embroidered with golden thread, shimmered in the dim light of the tent. Her face, though hidden behind the thin, sure veil, was strikingly beautiful, with features that had long captivated the entire village. But as the woman fussed over her dress and hair, Amara could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. She was struggling to maintain her composure. Beneath her calm exterior, fear and anxiety churned like a storm. Her stomach ached with a sharp pain, a pain that had been growing stronger over the past few days. "Are you all right, Amara?" one of her bridesmaids asked gently, noticing the bead of sweat on her forehead. "I'm fine," Amara replied, forcing a smile. "Just a little nervous." But it wasn't just nerves. She had been feeling something strange inside her for weeks now, an uncomfortable sensation, as if something was moving, twisting, slivering. She hadn't dared to tell anyone, not her mother, not Ku, not even the village healer Nana Esi, who was known for her wisdom and knowledge of herbs and spirit. She had hoped that the pain would subside, that it was merely a sign of pregnancy. After all, she was 3 months along, but the pain grew more intense with each passing day, and the movements inside her felt less like the kicks of a baby and more like the riding of a serpent. The trouble had begun 3 months ago, shortly after Quo had proposed that night under a full moon. Amara had a dream that left her shaken to her core. In the dream, she stood alone by the edge of the river that flowed through the village, its waters sea and silver under the moonlight. But there was an unnatural stillness to the air, an eerie silence that made her uneasy. She felt as if she were being watched, though she could see no one. Suddenly, the river surface began to ripple, and a figure emerged from the depths. It was an old woman with long, flowing silver hair and eyes that were dark as the night sky. Her face was crisped with hair, and she wore a robe of deep blue that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. The woman hovered just above the water, her feet never touching the river. She raised a bony finger and pointed at Amara's stomach. "Beware, child," she intoned, her voice like the rustling of leaves in a storm. "You carry more than just life in your womb. You carry a curse." Amara tried to speak, but no words came out. The old woman continued, her voice growing louder, echoing around the river banks. "The sea of the river spirit is upon you. It will take what belongs to it on the day you are most happy." The next moment, the old woman vanished, and the river returned to its calmate. Amara woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the first faint stirrings of life. At first, she dismissed the dream as nothing more than a nightmare, the product of her anxiety and excitement over the impending wedding. But the words of the old woman haunted her, echoing in her mind long after the dream had ended. In the weeks that followed, Amara noticed unusual signs around her. Birds began to behave strangely in her presence. Flocks of crows would gather on rooftops when she passed, cawing loudly, their black eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. Cats, usually friendly, would hiss and run away at the sight of her. Even the village dogs, which loved to play with her, started avoiding her, whining and keeping their distance. She brushed off these incidents as coincidences, but the strange feeling inside her continued to grow. There were times when she could swear she felt something moving within her, something that did not feel like a baby's gentle kick, but rather like the sinuous movement of a snake coiling around itself. Desperate for answers, she finally sought out Nana Esi, the village healer, a woman Known for her wisdom and knowledge of the old ways, she arrived at Nana Isi's. Hot early in the morning, her heart heavy. With fear, Nana Esi examined her, carefully, her face growing more serious. With every passing moment after a long silence, she spoke, "There is something on natura inside you, Amora," she said, her voice low and grave. "Something that does not belong in this world. I cannot help you. Only the river spirits can lift such a curse." Amora's blood run cold. The river spirits. She had heard the stories, the old legends passed down by the elders of spirits who dwelled in the river, spirits who were both benevolent and vengeful, depending on the mood in which they were approached, but she had never believed them to be more than myths, stories to scare children into behaving. Nana Esi had given her some HS and chanted ancient prayers, but nothing seemed to work. The movements inside her belly continued, and with each day they felt more and more like something alive, something waiting. The sun was at its zenith when the wedding ceremony began. The drums beat louder, and the villagers gathered under the grand baobab tree, where the elders sat in a semicircle, their faces solemn. The groom stood in front of them, his face beaming with joy and pride. He was dressed in a richly embroidered robe, and a golden crown sat atop his head. His friends and family surrounded him, singing songs of blessing and praising the union that would bring prosperity to the village. As Amora stepped out of the tent, the crowd erupted into cheers. Her dress, a flowing white gown with embroidery, shimmered in the sunlight. Her face, hidden behind the sheer veil, was still the center of attention, and the villagers whispered among themselves about her unmatched beauty. But Amora's steps were unsteady. With every step she took, the pain in her stomach grew sharper, more intense. She clutched her belly, trying to keep the smile on her face. She couldn't let anyone know what she was feeling. She had to maintain the appearance of a joyful bride. Noticed her discomfort as she approached. His smile faltered, replaced with a look of concern. "Amora, are you all right?" he whispered, his voice filled with genuine worry. "I'm fine, just a little tired," she managed to reply, though her voice was weak. The village chief, a tall man with a deep, commanding voice, began to recite the marriage blessings, calling upon the ancestors, the spirits of the earth, and the gods above to bless this union. The crowd fell silent, listening with reverence, but Amar was only half listening. The pain was becoming unbearable. She felt something inside her shift, something pushing against her insides with a force she had never felt before. She tried to focus on the chief's words, to find comfort in the familiar rituals, but the pain grew stronger, sharper with each passing second, and then it happened. A scream tore through the air, louder than any sound heard that day. Amara fell to her knees, clutching her stomach, her face contorted in agony. The crowd gasped, and several of the women screamed in terror. Rushed to her side, but she pushed him away, her eyes wide with panic and pain. Her white gown began to turn crimson as blood seeped through the fabric, spreading like a dark stain. She doubled over, screaming again, as if something were tearing her apart from the inside. Then, before the eyes of the shocked villagers, something long and dark emerged from beneath her garment, slided out slowly, its scales gleaming in the sunlight. The villagers watched in horror as a snake, a thick black serpent with red eyes, crawled out from between Amora's legs. It hissed loudly, its tongue flicking in and out as it see itself around her body. The crowd was paralyzed with fear. The women clutched their children, the men crossed themselves and muttered prayers, and some of the elders began to chant ancient incantations to ward of evil. No one could believe what they were seeing. The snake moved closer to Amara's face, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It CED around her torso, its head raised as if preparing to strike. This is a curse," one of the elders shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "Curse upon our village, Nana Ese." The village healer stepped forward, her face pale but determined. She looked at the snake, then At Amara and her expression darkened. "This is no ordinary snake," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the mimiars and cries of the villagers. "This is the spirit of the river, the prophecy, the curse has come true." The crowd erupted into panic, their voices rising in fear and confusion. Curse, a prophecy, what was going on? Amar's mother, Abina, had fallen to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. No, it can't be," she would, tears streaming down her face. "I kept her away from the river. I did everything I could." Nana shook her head solemnly, her expression one of sorrow. "The CSE is older than you, Abina. It was placed on your family generations ago. No matter what you did, it was destined to find her." The villagers' mamas grew louder, fear spreading like wildfire. Some began to back away, others clutched their children to their chest, and a few started whispering prayers to protect them from whatever evil had been unleashed. Suddenly a figure emerged from the crowd, an old woman with long silver hair and eyes as dark as the night's, the very same woman Amara had seen in her dream. The villagers gazed, recognizing her instantly, though none had seen her in the village before. The old woman spoke, her voice calm but with a power that silenced everyone. "I warned you," she said, looking directly at Amara. "The curse was placed by the river spirits when your ancestor betrayed them. For generations they waited for the right time to exact their revenge." Abina, her face a mask of anger and confusion, cried out, "You cursed my family. Why, what did we do to deserve this?" The old woman's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "Your great-grandfather took what did not belong to him, a sacred relic from the river. The spirits allowed your family to prosper, but the price had to be paid. The firstborn daughter of Yain was destined to give birth to the river's vengeance." Nana Isai nodded slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. "The snake is the embodiment of the river spirits' wrath. It had to be born to reclaim what was stolen." The snake, sensing the presence of the old woman, called itself tighter around Amara, its red eyes glowing with a strange otherworldly light. The villagers held their breath, unsure of what to do. The old woman turned to the crowd. "There is still a choice," she said. "The K can be lifted, but it demands a sacrifice, a life for a life. Who among you will offer themselves to save this girl?" The villagers looked at each other, fear edged on their faces. No one spoke, no one moved. Ku, still kneeling beside Amara, looked on, his face pale and his hands trembling. He loved her deeply, but the fear in his heart was overpowering. Then, to everyone's shock, a weak voice broke the silence. I will offer myself," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with determination. The old woman raised an eyebrow. "Surprised you would sacrifice yourself to leave the curse?" Amar nodded, tears in her eyes, but her voice steady. "If it means ending the suffering for my family, if it means my unborn child can live, I will do it." The old woman considered her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But know this, the spirits do not forgive easily. You must enter the river at midnight alone. If you survive until dawn, the curse will be lifted, but if you do not, your soul will belong to the river forever." Amara felt a chill run down her spine, but she nodded. "I accept." The villagers began to murmur again, their voices filled with both fear and admiration. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, and the drums fell silent as the moon rose high in the sky. The villagers gathered by the river bank. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of the river flow seemed louder than ever. The full moon cast a pale, ghostly light on the water surface, making it shimmer like liquid silver. Amara stood by the edge of the river, her gown now torn and stained, her eyes filled with resolve. She looked back at the villagers, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw her mother, her face dried with tears, and Ku standing with clenched fist, his expression a mixture of fear and hope. The old woman stood beside her, her face calm and expressionless. "The spirits are watching," she said quietly. "They will test you. Remember, do not look back. Keep your eyes forward and your heart steady." Amara took a deep breath and stepped into the cold, dark waters. The river was icy, and she felt the cold grip her bones, but she moved forward, wading deeper into the water. The villagers watched in silence, their faces tense and their breaths held. The river seemed calm at first, but as Amara moved further and the waters began to churn, swelling around her, she felt something brush against her legs. Something cold, something alive. Her heart rised, but she kept moving, her eyes fixed on the opposite shore. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. The nights grew colder, the wind picked up, and the whispers began, soft at first like distant echoes, but growing louder, more insistent. Amara heard voices, felt hands pulling at her, trying to drag her under. "Do not look back." The old woman's voice echoed in her mind. "Keep moving forward." The river continued to churn violently, and the whispers grew louder, like the wails of lost souls. Amara's vision blurred, her body shivering with cold, her mind foggy with exhaustion. She felt the river pulling her as if it had a life of its own, a force determined to claim her. She stumbled, almost fallen, but caught herself. Her hands were numb and her feet felt like lead, but she kept moving, her eyes fixed ahead, her spirit refusing to break. Then a figure emerged from the water, a man tall and gaunt, with skin as pale as moonlight and eyes like burning coals. He stared at her with a cruel smile. "Why do you struggle, girl?" he sneered. "You cannot escape. The river has claimed you." Amara's heart pounded, fear gripping her, but she refused to falter. "I will not give," she shouted, her voice filled with defiance. "I will not let you take me." The man laughed, a hollow, bone-chilling sound. "You think you are strong, but you are nothing," he taunted. "Turn back, and I may spare you for now." Amara hesitated for a moment, but then remembered the old woman's words, "Do not look back." She pushed forward, her eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the man's mocking laughter. The figure vanished, and the river grew calm again, but only for a moment. The water began to bubble, and dozens of ghostly hands emerged, reaching for her, grasping at her clothes, her hair, her arms. She screamed, kicking and thrashing, trying to free herself, but the hands held tight, pulling her down. Her strength was fading, her breath shallow and labored. She felt the darkness closing in, the coat sipping into her very bones. But then she saw it, a faint light in the distance, the first hint of dawn. She focused on it, her last hope, her last chance. She fought with everything she had, tearing herself free from the grasping hands, pushing forward with every ounce of strength left in her. The light grew brighter, and she felt the water warming, the hands falling away. She stumbled, almost fallen again, but kept moving, kept fighting, until finally she felt solid ground beneath her feet as the first ray of the sun broke over the horizon. The river grew still, the whispers faded, and the churning waters said. Amara emerged from the river, her body soaked, her clothes torn, but her spirit unbroken. The villagers erupted in cheers, their faces filled with joy and relief. The old woman nodded, a small smile on her lips. "The spirits have accepted her sacrifice," she announced. "The CSE is lifted." The snake that had coiled around Amara threw back into the river, disappearing beneath the surface. The villagers watched in awe as it vanished, their fear slowly replaced by admiration and respect. Ku rushed to Amara's side, wrapping his arms around her. "You did it," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You survived," Amara noted, exhausted but relieved. "I did it for us," she replied softly, "for our future, for our child." The village celebrated, for Deities rejoicing in the lifting of the curse. Amara and Ku were married in a quieter, more intimate ceremony, surrounded by those who had stood by them in their darkest hour. The river, once feared, became a place of reverence, a symbol of redemption and renewal. The villagers would come to its banks to offer prayers, to seek guidance, and to remember the day when a young bride had faced the spirits and emerged victorious. Amara and Ku began their life together with a newfound sense of purpose, and in gratitude they knew that they had been tested, that they had faced Unimaginable trials, but they had come. Through stronger, braver, and more united than ever, but the villagers would never forget the day the bride gave birth to a snake, a day that began with fear and ended with redemption, a day that taught them that sometimes the greatest curses can be lifted by the power of love, courage, and the willingness to face the unknown. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it, and subscribe our African F Tales channel.